Are we ready?
All good.
Yeah, okay, perfect. A quick introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Roxy Besserell. I am the secretary of NAHJ, the San Diego Tijuana chapter. Soy bilingüe. If anyone wants to leave anything in chat in English or Spanish, we're all really comfortable communicating in both languages. But thank you so much for joining us today. I want to share the screen, share the virtual floor with Monica from SANDSWA, if you want to introduce yourself real quick. Before I hand it over to you, I just want to say my pronouns are she, her. So yeah, Monica, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. My name is Monica May. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I also want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. And so I'm so excited for this conversation. I'm a board member at the San Diego Association of Science Writers, SANDSWA. We have gear on our website too, if anyone is interested. But I want to share, in case anyone's not familiar, just a little bit about who we are. We're about 80 science writers in the region, including journalists, freelancers, technical writers, public information officers at UC San Diego, Salk, Scripps Research, other places too. And we hold professional development events, happy hours. We have a new writing awards program as well, and book clubs, which are very exciting to me. This has been a topic that's been a hot one among a lot of our club members. So I am so excited about the conversation today. We've had an awesome prep call, and so thankful for the partnership with NAHJ. So that's enough for me. I will let the panelists take it away. I'm super excited.
Thanks, Monica. Why don't we start off with our panelists introducing themselves. If we want to start off with Faye, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, your pronouns, and why you wanted to join this panel.
Hi, my name is Faye Crevosher. I'm the Communications and Policy Director of Wild Coast Costa Salvaje. We are a binational an NGO organization. We conserve coastal and marine ecosystems and wildlife, and we address climate change through natural solutions. My pronouns, he, I'm a she. No, I'm not going to say that. Anyway, and I'm very thankful that you invited me here. It's a topic that I've been struggling many years about, because it's very important to talk to scientists. But it's not as easy because they speak a different language, not exactly Spanish and not exactly English. And so we need everybody to understand them. It's very important, I think, more today than ever. So it is a very important topic, talking science in Spanish for me.
Absolutely. Thank you for your introduction. Fabien, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. So I am an assistant professor at UC San Diego. I started a year ago. I'm in the Department of Pediatrics and Biological Sciences, and I study infectious diseases, specifically bacterial pathogens of the gut. So yeah, I got interested in this topic actually because of COVID-19 and vaccination disparities among Latinos and people of color. It's not something that I honestly thought about very much, other than when I was talking to my mom about science or speaking to Spanish with relatives. But I think because of COVID-19 and the lack of some communication in terms of science and vaccination, it's something that I became a little bit involved with. So I think it's a very important topic that we talk about and think of ideas of how to improve in science in Spanish.
Thank you. We're all looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Vicente, do you want to give us a quick hi, hello, little introduction?
Hi there, my name is Vicente Calderon. I apologize in advance for my English and for a little bit of my voice. I have a cold, so you can, it's not very comfortable to be with a cold and with this weather, but we'll have to manage. So I'm the editor of TijuanaPress.com, which is the public platform of this service agency. We normally work with producing news content for different media outlets in Mexico and in the US primarily, but we also work with other medium outlets from abroad. And I'm very thankful and excited about this panelist panel, because I remember one of the first essays that I wrote, even when I was studying in school, at the university, but already involving radio locally in Tijuana, was an essay called "The Science Without the Space," but just referring to the lack of enough information or stories or news about the different science. We are in a very interesting region in terms of the number of research and science institutions that we have in Baja California. So I'm very happy to be joining you guys.
Great. I'm really glad you mentioned that point, because that brings me to my first question. This question is open to all panelists. Fairly simple, but why do you think it's so important to communicate science news and science topics to Spanish speakers? This is open to anyone.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. Well, we live at the border, right? We are in this border, 2 countries, 1 region, geographically 1 region, and our problems cannot be solved unilaterally, as we in this border know very well, and that other people farther away from here miss. We need to work together. We need to combine our knowledge and our capabilities to be able to solve a lot of the situations that we have here with pollution of water, pollution of plastics, and definitely climate change. Also, you know, the States, the percentage of Spanish speakers in the US is growing fast. It's very important already, because Spanish is spoken not only in Mexico, but all Latin America and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And so it's a very important language that is, I would say today, part of the United States, organic part of the United States. And yes, it's very important. And yes, science is, as I said before, very important now with climate change, which is the most important challenge that humanity has today in every language. So definitely science is becoming a much more important and present topic in everybody. Also, well, we had the pandemic, and we need to communicate in English and in Spanish better, because we need to improve the communication of science, I think in general, but the topic here is Spanish, or definitely in Spanish too.
Thank you, Faye. Did anyone else want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would just add that as an infectious disease researcher, and obviously during the pandemic, I think we can see very clearly the importance of lack of communication of science and the impact that it has, right? Because one of the reasons I became involved with trying to disseminate information in Spanish was because we were seeing that early on the pandemic, COVID-19 was disproportionately impacting Latinos. They were about 3 times as likely to contract the virus and about twice as likely to die from COVID-19 compared to non-Hispanic whites. And so this the importance of communicating the science and the risk that was involved, I think, was something that became clear to me. And then when vaccination started rolling out, we also saw that non-Hispanic whites were being vaccinated about twice the rate of Latinos. And so I think that the importance here is, to me, that when you're not communicating science and you're not spreading the words, this can really have a huge impact that can, be the biggest impact, which is death, right? So when you're seeing people not being vaccinated or being exposed to a deadly virus, I think, to me, it shows that the importance of really spreading the word in Spanish and all languages, really.
Vicente, I think you wanted to share something.
Just to say that it has been always very important to find the space for science in the mass media, but now is more relevant because it's one of the tools that we have to combat the spread of misinformation or disinformation. So right now, that's what I think is really relevant and time relevant, specifically this topic, because we are facing the consequences of this mass media access or information and at this level, an unprecedented level for the public. And science being proven facts is one of the key elements that we have to be able to face the challenges that we going to be confronting in a very important period of time for the humanity. Even it sounds kind of ambitious, but I think that's reality. And media and science should be working together, trying to pass along that information. That could be, as Fabien said, a matter of saving lives.
Especially here in, Southern California and San Diego, where we're, with one region, but two countries, right? And we have, Spanish speakers and English speakers. It's really important to have, give more access to this information. And I heard, you guys are passionate about certain topics. I heard climate change, vaccination efforts, but are there any other topics related to science or the environment that you feel should be covered as we speak?
Well,
Go
okay.
ahead.
No, you go ahead, Vicente, after you.
Okay, thank you. I'm passionate about mental health information, scientific proven mental health. I think it's more relevant. Well, I'm originally trained as a clinical psychologist. I got involved with media because I was trying to spread the correct notion of psychology to the locals in Tijuana in the 80s through the media. My intention was not to become part of the media, but to use the media to spread the idea that we were not reading minds, so that we were not reading the horoscope. That I have no problem with whoever wants to follow that line, but I think in general, it's very important. And that was the reason I got involved with the media. Now, the circumstances and the impact of the lockdowns and the changes of the interpersonal relations, it's proven that it's more necessary. I see some advances, some progress, but not as much as I think are necessary, specifically in Spanish.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, we protect the ocean. And I'd just like to remind everybody here that we are the blue planet. And in order to survive, we need to take care of our oceans. Because as species disappear in the oceans, there are the canary in the mine. We will all follow if we don't take care of this, of all that plastic and all that trash that we're putting in there, and that is affecting all of us. The ocean also produces 85% of the oxygen that we all breathe, like or not the beach. So I don't care about the beach, And, for me, years ago, I started seeing the impact of not communicating science and the misinformation in regard to mangrove and to coral reefs and in regard to taking care of the ocean. Because, industry spreads a lot of information that they like. I call them misinformation, So I think it's very relevant today. But it has been for a while, though we were not so aware of it. People in the ocean were more aware but now it seems very present. So.
Faye, I actually have a specific question for you at Wild Coast Salvaje. So you talked about like the oceans, climate change. How do you go about deciding what topic is more relevant? How do you decide what you want to talk about?
Well, they're together. There is no separation really. For example, mangroves, which is the trees that grow between the, with a little bit of fresh water. I feel like saying sweet water, translating from Spanish. Here is one example.
Well, we think in two languages. It's
agua dulce, but there is no sweet water in English. It's fresh water. I made those mistakes many times. That's part of what we do, right? And salty water. And these trees are the trees that in this planet absorb more CO2 of the atmosphere than any other plant, more than the forest, the rainforest that we thought was top. So, for example, taking care of that also protects the communities from the storms that are stronger and stronger, and from the rising of the seas. So it's intricate, the rises of the seas, the stronger it's climate change, it's affecting everybody. So the need to take care of these coastal ecosystems because they absorb so much CO2, because they protect against climate change. They're heroes of climate change. Same with the corals who help with climate change. I mean, it's really one topic. It's really difficult to make it two. But yes, the emphasis we have been giving is climate change, because that is really the very serious challenge that humanity has. And we're talking, I know people don't like to say I'm like over dramatic, but we're talking now survival of our species. And it sounds, but yeah, I mean, really, you see how this is progressing, how fast it is if you see numbers. That's why science is so important. Like Vicente said, the numbers, the facts are there. So we need to talk about it and show them in a way that everybody can understand that in Spanish and in English and in all languages, so people can realize where we are, and we need everybody to help to overcome this big challenge. So yeah, but the ocean is really central. So we kind of found ourselves in the midst of this topic. That's how, so we don't have really to choose too much. So our topics are related to climate change.
Fabien, are there any topics that you'd like the media to cover currently?
Well, I think as I was mentioning, there's definitely a need to cover facts related to when there's we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I think it's very clear that there was a lack of communicating the facts. And in this day and age with social media, I think, the misinformation that's put out there is much better and much faster than we are at being able to be clear and concise about the facts. And so really beyond science, I think there's a war on the truth and the facts. And I think, people are not purposely, spreading misinformation. Sometimes they receive misinformation and they really don't understand the reality. And so they become confused and they believe something that isn't true. And so that could spread really quickly. And so I think as a scientist and together with the media, I think we need to do a better job at being able to communicate things more quickly and more effectively, so that people know how to distinguish or learn how to distinguish the truth from misinformation. And that's something that I've realized with COVID-19, and as I was going along, I thought that people were pretty clear about the reality, but then family members were sending me videos and articles of misinformation, and I would try to explain that they weren't correct. And it was hard to keep up because it was constantly more and more misinformation. And when you see these things, they are pretty convincing because they are very they keep things very concise, and they play to what to people's fears. And so I think it's very difficult, and it's a challenge. But I think in the media and in science, I think as Vicente was saying, we need to do a better job collaborating in order to come up with strategies and really think about how can we combat this this war on facts, and how that obviously, as I said, the impact of that can be really extraordinary especially when it involves human life.
Yeah, and I think misinformation and misinterpretation can also go hand in hand sometimes. And with that, it's really difficult when you're trying to communicate something in two languages, because someone that might be stronger in one language might come across information in English, and if they feel more confident in Spanish, they might not understand all the translations. Who knows? But I think everyone here, we all have experience writing and communicating in English and in Spanish. So I'm curious, when you're writing in either language, is there a difference between the way you communicate information, news, to Spanish speakers and English speakers? Is there a difference? This is open to all panelists.
I think, in general, the problem with scientists, I hope there's a lot of scientists and the people who are listening to us, science is exact science, and things in the world are not black and white. And I understand that. But in communications, we come from exactly like Fabien just said, the misinformation comes very clear, plays to their fears. They're good communicators we are competing with. But when you try to put those scientific facts in, and you want the scientists to be the ones communicating. So first, they speak a language that no one speaks. They use these words and nobody knows what they're saying. Everybody's embarrassed to tell them. I found that even the word sustentabilidad or sostenible, I mean, there's in Spanish, there is a whole problem with that word. People don't know what it is. So I make scientists say, for example, sustainable fishing, no. Pesca inteligente, intelligent fishing, when we're not killing that many animals and we're not using putting it back. Explain. So that's the problem is scientists have a language and that says many things in one word, but people don't understand that language. Also, Latinos have a lesser degree of education than a lot of the people we have to communicate with. Have to be very simple, has to be very direct and understandable. So that is a big bridge to cross. You make the scientists pull them. And then they say, and they answer when you talk to them first, they say, yes, but no. Because, yes, things in science are complicated. They're not one thing. And you have to do one way. And I understand that. But when you communicate, you cannot tell them, bueno, sí, así es, yeah, exactly, but not exactly, because people get so confused, they stop hearing you, they don't understand anything. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are losing the war on the climate change. Oh, is it humans who are creating it? Is it exist? In general, climate change? Is it the vaccination? Say, oh, are the vaccination good? But and some people get a reaction, but some people don't. Yes or no, no or yes. The problem in communication is you have to be clear and concise and use a language they understand. And sometimes I say that to the scientists, also the journalists. Not all journalists that cover environment or cover the pandemic are scientists or have any training in science. And you talk with these words, palabrotas. I don't let people say, I call them the bad words, the science words. And so I don't allow it, no, explain with a whole sentence, sorry, because people don't understand. So if the journalists don't understand, imagine when he writes his article, how it comes out. Nobody understands anything. I've seen it time and time again, when I started doing journalism just like Vicente because of that, and try to straighten things up. But so it's very important in the science. There is the additional language, scientific language, that you have to bridge for English and for Spanish. In Spanish, I think it's a little bit easier because the big words, the palabrotas, are Latin words. So somehow in our Spanish that comes from Latin more directly, you can kind of figure it out. Bueno, pues sustentable, sostener, but really people don't know. And the articles come out pretty bad. And the scientists then don't want to talk to the media. No, they write what they want. And the only problem is they didn't understand what you were saying at the end of the story. So it's a bridge. Everybody lives in their world that has exactly opposite needs or functioning. And that's what we, the writers of science, have to do. Kind of translate the scientific lingo and words and what's happening there, put it in a much simpler context and explain it to the non-scientists in Spanish. So that's how I see mine. And that's, I think, it's one of the big complications in general science in any language and specific in Spanish.
And I'm so glad you're bringing up the topic of journalism, because I relate and I agree with a lot of things that you said about taking, because as a journalist, you're presented all this information and it's, sometimes it's jargon specific to a different field. And our job is to take that and simplify it and condense it and communicate it in a way that's effective and that's concise and that's easy for everyone to understand. So I agree. It's essentially taking that information and deciding what's relevant, what's important, putting that at the top and writing. I was taught to write for an audience of middle schoolers, really, so everyone can really understand what you're trying to say. And then you can share that with your colleagues, with your friends, and, you know, getting rid of that superiority complex of, you know, wanting to say, I know more than you by using big words. But no, it should be accessible to everyone. Vicente, I see you nodding and smiling, so I'm really curious as to what your thoughts are on this.
The fact that I think is that we are all guilty. I mean, the scientists, the journalists, the activists, because we need to, and again, I always go back to this need of collaboration or have more joint efforts. And I think this will be a good point because we really need to found or bridge those gaps that we are facing. I don't think it's different in English or in Spanish. And, you know, if you see the percentage of reporters able to manage with science information is very small, either in US media or in English media or in Spanish language media in their particular countries. No, probably it's more difficult in Spanish language media in the US because for the percentage of media outlets are smaller than the so-called general public, no? But the thing is also that we always been struggling with this lack of spaces or media outlets that are devoted space or pages or time in the electronic media for these topics. And we need to just move past that idea that we need to do something, but effectively began to collaborate. It's, for example, I was telling you guys that we in Baja California have several high-level institutions of research, from Ensenada and Ciencia to Tijuana, Colegio de la Frontera Norte, the social studies and migration and urban development and security, public safety, many important relevant issues, or the access of medicine in general, or medical approaches to different, there's a high number. I think I couldn't find that reference, but I remember that in Baja California, we have one of the highest rates of per capita scientists among our population, in the sense that we are in Baja California less than 4 million persons, which is a relatively small in terms of population as a state, but we have several research institutions. So we have a lot of scientists among us. And unfortunately, what I can see is that their work hasn't been able to impact the society at the level of the presence that we can see. I know we have advanced, so in some degrees. We used to have, for example, I remember in the 90s, the president said, well, in the north, Tijuana has some of the most prevalent diseases of the middle class or upper middle class communities and less of the poor communities. Now we are going just worse on both accounts. I mean, we have so-called third world countries common diseases, and we also have like obesity and problems linked to a different type of feeding habits. So I think it's this. I don't think it's the language is that difficult. It's just the environment that we, the journalists, have to deal with. Because you were right. I mean, they are told us to be very simplistic or not complicated. And we are also, besides that, we are also always facing time and space constriction limitations. So, and that's why the papers are so long, because you need to be very precise. You need to make a reference to everything. I think we have better tools to, and instead of having the reference, you can just put, for example, a link within the body of the text. So we should be finding these advantages and these new opportunities that we have to disseminate knowledge or information based on facts.
Fabien, so I know you wrote an article for the LA Times about vaccination efforts in Spanish. And prior to this panel, during one of our conversations, you shared with me that your first language was Spanish, but then as you grew up, you slowly left it and now you only use it mostly around family. when you were writing this article, do you have any takeaways from your experience? Did you face any difficulties writing in Spanish about such an important topic?
Yeah, so yeah, like as you said, my first language is Spanish, but my education was 100% in English. I was born in California, and especially science, which is pretty much its own language. So it was a challenge. And when I set off to kind of write this article, the reason I was inspired to write it in the first place was because a colleague of mine, Ali Wise, wrote an article in English, and I thought it was really good. She was essentially writing a very simplified and concise article about why the vaccines are safe and effective, the COVID-19 vaccines. So I thought, oh, this would be great to find an article like this in Spanish. And so I was actually looking for, my intention was not to write an article in Spanish. I was simply looking for one because I don't have a strong, background in writing in Spanish. But what I did find was that I couldn't find any articles in Spanish that were, directed to the general public and that were just very concise and, fact-based, just clearly why the vaccines are not rushed, what are the vaccines, why are they effective, why are they safe? And so once I realized that this wasn't going to be that easy, I contacted my friend and I said, hey, I think I want to try to do something like this in Spanish. And so we kind of worked together based on what she had wrote, and we added some information. And so yes, it was a challenge for me because I essentially had to learn how to write this in Spanish, because I had never wrote a lot of the terms, even though I wanted to keep it as simple and accessible as possible so that the general public would understand. And I wanted to keep it very open and not too complicated. But still, it was a challenge for me because I had never wrote anything like this in Spanish. And so I spent a lot of time researching how to say certain things, right, to make sure I sounded correct. I sent it to my dad. I sent it to other friends that have a better grasp on Spanish, and I got some feedback, making sure that it sounded normal. But it was a challenge. But one thing I did learn was that, first of all, there is a need for more science writers in Spanish that can communicate, topics like this, especially when it comes to something that's so important. And so the article that we wrote, which is called, so originally we actually wrote this article in the LA Times. So we were looking to see where we would publish this, and we contacted the LA Times, and we found a writer, Selena Rivera, that agreed to publish the article. And so originally it was written as a piece, but then she suggested that we write it as a Q&A so that she thought it would be more effective. And so the article, which is called Científicos aseguran que la vacuna de COVID-19 no fue apresurada. Aquí explican las razones. And so essentially, scientists assure that the COVID-19 vaccine was not rushed. And here we explain our reasons. And so in the article, which is pretty short, and I can post it if you'd like, what we wanted to do is just explain very clearly, but also concisely that the vaccines are not rushed. They're a product of 50 years of vaccine research. They've been in development for 10 years. This is why they're safe. They've gone through all the clinical trials, all the efficacy testing. They've been tested in clinical trials on thousands of people. They're safe, they're effective. And the COVID-19 infection is much more risky to your health than the vaccine. So that was essentially the premise. It was very simple and to the point. And so one thing that I learned from this process, number one, that writing in Spanish, writing science in Spanish is a challenge for me because it's not something that I had ever done before. But also I realized that there is a need for more scientists, bilingual scientists to perhaps engage in this and help to communicate important science in Spanish as well.
I definitely agree with that. Prior to the panel, when I was just doing my research, just trying to see who would want to be involved, I noticed that there was a lack of Latino or Hispanic journalists, at least, covering science. Faye, I saw you smiling during when Fabien was speaking, and I know you guys, your nonprofit, you guys do your work in Spanish and in English. So how do you go about finding your writers or journalists or scientists that are comfortable in both languages? Oh, you're muted.
Oh,
there we go.
Yeah, sorry. Well, basically, I don't do that. I don't look for bilingual.
Yeah, okay.
I am bilingual, más o menos. I am better in Spanish. Than I grew up. I was educated mostly in Spanish, then in English in the university and college. So I was a journalist myself in Spanish first, and then radio in English, PBS. So I look for Hispanic, Spanish journalists, Spanish-speaking journalists to do the article in Spanish. And then I look for the English-speaking journalists to do an article in English. Because I will say one more thing, that is that the way we write in Spanish and in English, not only it's different, but the cultures are very different. I live in the middle with one foot in each country, so I know. Between space and time, and I mean, very different concepts. So, the way we communicate something in Spanish is a little bit idiosyncratically different than in English, because you're trying to appeal to the interests of the reader. So the interests are different. The languages, Spanish is so much more language to say the same thing, when in English it's a very efficient language in one sentence or two, and then you cut the sentence where I would used to put a comma, now I put a punto, finish of the sentence. Mexico, in Spanish we have the how do you call it? Run-on
sentences?
Run-on, which for me that's normal writing. Here, where you put the comma, you put the punto, one sentence, two sentences, three sentences, okay? But so between the way you speak, the length of the article, and the way you communicate to appeal, at least, the beginning, the hook to get the public interested in reading the whole thing, it has to be different. It works better when it's different. It works. So yeah, you're right. There are not many journalists that write perfectly both languages. But there are many journalists in this area that speak Spanish, Univision, y Telemundo, here, Florida, no lack of Spanish-speaking journalists or reading. And then all the journalists in English, so it's not too difficult if you don't look for one person doing both. Because like you thought, see, for Fabien, it's easier to write in English. For me, ni hablar, no, en Español. I make mistakes in English, which I'm probably doing now when I speak. Beside my accent, which I know some people don't quite understand what I'm saying. I have to speak slowly. So that's the point. But there are many journalists that speak one language. Still, science is hard. Science is more difficult than other topics, and we do have to acknowledge that.
So essentially you're saying that you look for someone that's an expert in one language or an expert in the other to write about that.
Yeah. And I keep the scientists I'm standing there like with hands like that. I say, don't say that word. They hate me. I know scientists that really don't like me, but they get very well understood. Actually, when the article comes out or the video, the radio, TV, they're very happy. Then we already become friends again. But in the process, yeah.
Yeah, in the process, it's like, hate me now, thank me later. Vicente, you're an expert in writing and communicating in Spanish at Tijuana Press. So I'm curious, how often do you receive pitches for science stories or the environment, or do you take on stories? How does that work in Tijuana Press with science topics?
First of all, you are very kind to say that I'm an expert. I don't think I'm an expert, but I do my best every time I have to write something. And the first thing that I need to do is to listen and to try to understand. Tijuana Press, it doesn't even like it sounds like a newspaper, but we are not. We work differently, and normally it's us pitching the stories to different media outlets, or the media outlets assigning us or commanding us some commissioners on certain projects. So I don't get much of that. Eventually, somebody was trying to publish something. We get some essays, and sometimes from researchers, especially from social science, because we have several institutions in that sense. We normally refer them to some of the other more traditional media outlets of the city, because we are very careful, and we normally don't put anything else that we haven't been able to produce on our own, or use specific, very clearly agencies that, let's say, we use a lot of stories put out by the UN News Service or UNESCO, the Organization for Education, Science, and Cultural Culture from the UN. Other than that, we are very careful in that sense. But it's not because we don't want to. And let me just go back a little bit. You do have a lot more production or research or papers of science information, because you have a lot more institutions, specifically in this area from the US, devoting time, effort, and budget specifically for those entities. That's why you have a lot more, a higher level of production of information from scientists in the US. You have the chunk of that population is larger than the one we have in Mexico, and specifically during this presidential time, we have seen these big discussions about the severe cuts that they have done to the budget of science, the CONACYT, and the way it has been managed. The CONACYT is the entity who deals from the federal government with science in Mexico, and it's cutting budgets. And so if you add to that the number of media outlets from minorities is only a fraction of the general information, that's why you have this problem. We have seen this problem even in Mexico, the lack of or the need of more space from many, many decades. And I was reading, somebody mentioned here that there's a network of Mexican science journalists who was created in 2016 formally due to several efforts and previously, but we have seen there's another society of Mexicans for the press, for the Mexican Society for the Spread of Science and Technology. That was created in 1986. So the struggle has been there from several decades ago. We are still dealing with all these elements that make it more difficult. That's again why I think it's relevant. Any little step, baby steps that we move, but just keep doing those, even if they are small steps, just keeping coming frequently.
So where do we go from here? Do you guys or panelists have any tips on how to bridge that gap between science and science writers in Spanish or English? Any strategies, how to make communicating science a little bit easier?
I will say devote a little bit more budget for the spread of, if you're a research institution, put a little bit more money where your mouth is. Just devote and hire more people in both languages or that are bilingual, or one for the general or the English media outlets and one for the Spanish language media outlets, or by bilingual people, hire bilingual people. Also make more a more concrete effort to reach out. I mean, USD, for example, is now having daily, I think it's a weekly newsletter that is putting out some expert and different topics. I think that works because we as editors or reporters, we are always struggling against time. And if you make things easier for us, the possibility, the chances to convince an editor that publish that will increase, and that will be a good step. It's always about the money in these fields, but also on the conscious efforts are the ones that are seen from all involved and all attending to this Zoom webinar or communication, just to not giving up. I haven't been very successful because most of the stories that the subscribers to Tijuana Press, the media outlets aren't generally interested or think that there's more urgent topics to cover here at the border than the need of science. But we need to be more creative also to how to present those stories.
Did anyone else want to share a few tips or strategies? We have a few more minutes before we can go into a Q&A. If there's anything else that you'd like to share before we move forward? Oh, Faye, you're muted.
I'm muted. I do, the construction area is difficult, therefore I'm muted. I do want to agree with Vicente and emphasize the fact that we need scientific institutions. Scripps does a good job, but all the scientific institutions we have in the border, for starters, and pharma, I mean, to put more resources in communication. Definitely, it's very important. I'm really worried about losing the climate change battle. And so really, you know, it is very important that to hire people can do that job of translating science into Spanish or science into English, or yes, and put the information out there with processes, you know, and you know, the outreach to the community should be a priority. And I know scientists are very hard pressed for resources, for research and for time, just like us, like Vicente said. But this, I think, has to be emphasized, the importance, the need to do that more and more. And I mean, they're getting it. Now, I think there's beginning they are taking steps, scientific institutions, to do that. So it is really important.
And I think a positive change and impact is definitely doable, especially here. I'm looking at the comments. There are so many organizations and, you know, comments just sharing more about where people can be involved. But let's go over to the Q&A. We have a question here from Mackenzie. Thanks, Mackenzie. You're asking, what mistakes do you notice English journalists making the most when covering / interpreting the Spanish-speaking world?
Oh. I don't know.
Any mistakes?
Yeah, I don't know when you're translating from Spanish to English, you know. I never read the articles. I don't know if the article is translated or they did write it, but, you know, sometimes there's this tendency, there's this push for writing like in English in Spanish, to try to do the same openings with a personal story. I mean, there's this, it doesn't work in Spanish, really. You know, we Latinos in general, yes, I'm generalizing, are more emotional people. We are. But when that's like how we live our life every day. It's normal for us, you know. But when you read, you don't need to put that there. You know, it's like, what's that? But it works. The New York Times starts always with a personalized little story, and from there they jump to the article. Oh, fine. And in English, you read in English, it works. Mm-hmm. This type of, it's idiosyncrasies really when you're trying to translate the culture more than the content. And more, therefore, I go back to the intro, how you start the article. And basically at the, you know, then the body of the article is the same, but the hooks do have to be a little different. Yeah, some, you know, in terms of, you know, we just perceive them as they're trying to impose their culture on me. But no.
So having definitely a strong hook or a strong lead to get the reader's attention is what you're saying.
Well, that's
Start off strong.
Yeah, but that's true for any language, for any article in any part of the country.
Just in writing in general, I agree.
But the lead has to be a hook for that people, and that language, for that culture. More, that's like the most difficult part to translate.
Yeah, I agree with Faye. Sorry, I just wanted to add that I agree with what Faye saying, that I think it's important to keep in mind the cultural differences for any language. And also when you're, when you're providing information and reaching out to the public, I think you need to take into account the differences in the culture and what types of things people are worried about, right? Because when we're promoting vaccinations in English to Americans, we would say, everyone vaccine, go get a vaccine, right? You just go, the government's providing for free. There's no worry that, there's going to be any hesitation. Whereas with Latinos, which a lot of them, a lot of the Latino population here is undocumented. Some people were afraid about what's going to happen when we go get a vaccine. Are we going to have to provide ID? Is there going to, is the government going to possibly have any repercussions? Are they're worried about deportation? And so when you're communicating the same message, which is get a vaccine, it's free, you have to take into account that Latinos are worried about the government, right? So you have to provide some information and say, there's no ID required. You have, don't worry about this. So you have to be not only, important to know how to translate culturally, but also take into account the cultural differences in the history of these differences. And, for Blacks, right, there's a lot of history of maltreatment in the medical community, right? So you can't just expect that they're going to go trust their medical providers the same way. So I think, having cultural competence and, empathy for what types of things people are afraid about is important when you're providing scientific information, right? You can't just assume that everybody's gonna, understand things the same way, and that every culture is gonna have the same level of confidence in the government or whatever.
Couldn't be said better. Exactly. The examples are brilliant.
In terms of cultural competence, someone in the Q&A chat box put something related to WhatsApp. And I know WhatsApp, the application, it's if you're not familiar with it, it's just to send messages. A lot of people from different countries use it, especially in Mexico. So the question reads, along with changing the language used to communicate science, how can we spread the news better? For example, many Latinos use WhatsApp, but it's also where a lot of misinformation spreads. I've seen it firsthand with like memes and stuff, and like my family group chat. Is there a way to utilize media applications like WhatsApp?
Yeah, I did respond to this, and I think this is a great, I think, looking at these unconventional ways to communicate beyond the media, I think this is, earlier you were asking, what can we do? And, as scientists, I think at least my experience is I'm constantly being asked from family members, right? Or, someone sends me a meme or something from WhatsApp, or, they're like, well, did you see this? What do you think of this? Right. So I'm always constantly explaining, right. So I think thinking about how to use these unconventional avenues for communication is important, but also, one way to also help address this is to emphasize or train people like me who are scientists that are constantly communicating science, how to do so more effectively in Spanish, right? Because someone like me who's bilingual and as a scientist, I feel some responsibility to try to help, at least my friends and family and help answer their questions. And so, there's I fortunately have less the abilities to communicate in Spanish, but I also know a lot of, bilingual scientists that might not feel as comfortable answering these things in Spanish. And so perhaps providing a little bit more resources and training for bilingual or, bicultural scientists that speak Spanish or have family that speaks Spanish would be a way to, help disseminate information quickly without having such a formal process all the time. But I think this is something that we should think about as well.
I think Lori Saldaña, hi Lori, just has something in the Q&A I want to address, which is, yes, that's a very good example, Lori. The problems in the US are very different than the problems in Mexico or in other countries. And, we don't have really too many denier politicians that say, oh, we're not giving don't vaccinate. It's, there are all these problems of vaccination. They don't work. They just work. That is not a problem in Mexico. The problem is we don't have vaccines. The problem is we have millions of people. We have to vaccinate, and we have to be, beggars cannot be choosers. So we're just like doing all kinds of, trying to get vaccines. But the problems are different, definitely, of what's happening in the US, in more red states, completely. We don't have that. It's not even a question. Just like Fabien said, we are afraid of the government for other reasons. And so our problems are a little different. If they're not asking, they want the permission, they want to take away your papers, migra. So we have different, but also in Mexico, the problems as why yes or no vaccination, really, I don't know anybody who can be vaccinated and doesn't want it. Most people flock, there's big lines, everybody, but there's not enough for everybody. That is one of the big problems of Mexico, probably a lot of Latino America. So different. So that's it. Also, when you translate, that would not pass at all. We wouldn't, the reading people wouldn't understand what we're talking about.
We're running out of time. Sorry, Vicente, go ahead.
Just really quickly, you'll be surprised because I've seen a lot of people who doesn't want to be vaccinated. They're afraid. They have different, mainly the lack of trust on the government. What they think, as Fabian was saying at the beginning, that they think they were rushed and the process was skipping some important aspects, but in general, it's not as much as we see in the US. And also, we are not in that sense as much outspoken, and for that matter, that's relevant. And just, I think I'm an analog guy. I come from an era where all the social media, we didn't have so many tools. But I think all of these tools are tools. As long as we keep them within the realm of professional information, verified data, we can use TikTok or memes or whatever, WhatsApp or any other tool of communication. We need to be, particularly here, we need to be more efficient and being able to handle many of those things. But the problem is, if you invest too much time on learning how to deal or do a good TikTok or other platform that is new, then you're missing that time and reading and learning and going deep to understand the relevant topics that we are facing now. Sorry, I just want to say that.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. I think we're running out of time, but if our panelists have a few more minutes, we do have some more questions in the Q&A. Are we good to stay another 5 minutes?
Yes.
We can look at, okay, perfect. Speaking of, Vicente, you brought up how a lot of people don't trust the government or even, journalists. We have a question here. How can we effectively fight against people not trusting scientists and or government institutions? So if you have any advice on that.
I think just doing better journalism is going back and verifying and find the elements in the data that will support any other misconception or any doubts. I mean, it's normal for the people to have doubts about something that relevant, so unprecedented. And again, we are not familiarized, most of the users are not familiarized with the scientific process. And if we recognize, acknowledge that they haven't had all the exposure to this type of information, then we're going to be able to put it in context. Mackenzie was asking about when we translate things, and you guys, both Faye and Fabian, were talking about the cultural aspect. It's a matter of context. You need to put it in context to be able to answer the questions better. And for that matter, you need to spend a little bit more time listening to where people doubting or having doubts about this problem is coming from. So you're going to be able to understand and find a better route to give them a more satisfactory response. If you do a great piece and very well put a story, but it's not attractive for the reader, it's just useless. It's useless. So we need to make a little bit more an effort in that sense.
Let's move on to the next question. We know that the Latino community in the US is not a monolith, but it seems like most Spanish language journalism is targeted toward one group. How can we reach the lesser represented groups that have different cultures, but share the same language, maybe not the same dialect?
Well, you know, for example, California, most Latinos, most, not all, are Mexican. In the other coast, the Latinos are Boricuas, meaning Puerto Rico, República Dominicana, Florida Cubans, and there are Cubans everywhere. Mexicans are there in the mix too, but in the mix, much lesser than here. Here we are the majority of Latinos. So, well, that could help in how the journalists in the other coast are Puerto Ricans and are Dominicans. But just to tell you is that we share a lot of the mentality. Yeah, yes, there are differences in each country. If you're from a beautiful island like Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, different than if you're in Mexico City or the north of Mexico. And even Mexico has many cultures. The norteño culture and Spanish, Ocho, and our Mexico City and South Oaxacan accent are different accents, different words, but we understand each other. Even Argentinians, Uruguayans, you know, we do understand. They don't use certain words that we use, that we think it's Spanish, but it's really Nahuatl. We have incorporated Nahuatl language, and in Oaxaca there is Zapoteca words. But if you say, what? You say, oh, yeah, no huaraches, these are sandalias. Ah, sandalias. That's the real Spanish word. The other is the indigenous word that we have now in Mexico. We all use it. But so they can understand in the context. It's not so difficult, and the cultures are different, yes, but not so different. The Anglo-Saxon and the Latino culture, the US and Mexico are distant neighbors because the cultures are very distant. With the others, there are differences, but they're more understandable. But yeah, the journalists of here are from Mexican descent, you know, like the scientists, the Latino scientists like Fabien de aquí, but the family from Mexico. And in the other coast from other places, and in, you know, Central America and Cuba and that in Florida, there are few Mexicans. They like our accent, but this is the story. But we understand each other quite good. We all listen to Univision y Telemundo.
Yeah, and I think that, yeah, and then I agree with, I think, you know, but Gabriela's point is well taken that, you know, when we communicate in Spanish, we can't assume everybody comes from exactly the same cultural background, but, you know, we do overlap in the fact that we speak Spanish and we are Latino. But of course, right, the Mexican-American first generation immigrant in California is not, you know, exactly the same as a second, third generation Cuban in Florida, right? So there are a lot of differences, right? And but I think that, you know, Spanish is the unifying connector there, right? That we could all at least understand each other. But yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind, that it's not for everybody. Hopefully in Florida, there's Cuban scientific journalists that can to relate with a little better, but that's probably not gonna be me.
Let's do one more question before we close this out. In the meantime, if our panelists want to share maybe their contact information or their social media in the chat, in case our attendees want to reach out. But for our last question, I'm just going to condense it to the question part. In the USA, the population of Latins is very diverse, and the accents mix even more. Do you have any tips on how to choose the words to get to a broader audience regardless of their accent? So basically, any tips on how to choose the words to reach broader audiences, regardless of their accents?
Well, I think besides accents, go ahead. I was just going to say really quick, besides accents, there's, you know, it's also slang, right? I think the word, like Faye was saying, right? There's, you know, huaraches, sandalias, there's different slang, and especially when you get further away from geographically, right? The Chilean Spanish can differ quite a bit from Mexican Spanish, and so you know, it can make it difficult to communicate. And I think, right, I think it'd be helpful if we could target, you know, if you could translate an article that would be understandable to every different Latino would be the ideal situation, but I think that'd be very challenging. But I think it's true, and I think it's well taken, a point well taken, that not all Spanish is the same. And if you really want to communicate to the most broad way possible, then I think it's important to take into account that there are also within Spanish, differences in how people say things and what words and slang is used. Go ahead, Vicente, sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I go back to context. When we at Tijuana Press, we were working in a collaboration with the Voice of San Diego, specifically about water, and we always were conscious about how they will interpret in one side or another, or in English or in Spanish. And we tried to make an effort to put it in context again, to see what was more relevant, what could be more important for a broader aspect of the segment of the readers or viewers, but also we sometimes need to see if something will make a connection with that particular community that you are trying to reach. So sometimes you have to add an extra sentence trying to say, well, they call it this here and they call it that there. And people will understand and feel comfortable because they are learning more stuff, more simple stuff that adds to their knowledgement in general. I think that's an important topic. And again, we are always, as journalists, struggling with time and space, but we always, if you devote more time for the writing or creative process, you more or less will be able to find. Sometimes we didn't have problems with the communication between Mackenzie and myself, but we spend a lot of time talking, and that helped us a lot, I think.
Yeah, well, and the Spanish is the basic, yes. And, I'm like, when I'm talking to people from Central America, South America, I try to use the Spanish word because it's not only the slang, it's the word we have incorporated now at the language. It's not slang, it's real words of a different language. So yeah, I would say first come to my mind, huarache. When I'm talking with an Uruguayan, immediately you know that, you say, oh, sandalias. That is the common denominators in sandalias, because that is sandals in real Spanish, like in the Spanish that the Spaniards brought to the whole region. So that word is understood by everybody, minus, yeah, but we don't use it. You have to be a little more conscious. And yes, the more you can, say, but today, it's, instant communication, WhatsApp, world communication, Facebook. So I guess the languages will start kind of taking from all the languages like a common denominator or something like that would happen. It's too new today, but we'll see in 300 years, the next generation, how these dialects get. And yeah, like we work a lot in Oaxaca, in regions where people do speak Spanish as a second language. And yeah, they understand less Spanish because that's not their mother tongue, but there's no way we can speak Zapoteco, así que, it's very hard to find us. Maybe there is some Zapoteco speaker scientists, but like someone was putting in the Q&A, it's more and more difficult with the indigenous languages.
Yeah, I think it's about, knowing which region you're in, having a lot of awareness and adapting, and just being open, to all the different, versions of Spanish, dialects, everything really. But we went over our time, so I'm gonna, close this off. But thank you to our panelists for being here. Monica from SANDSWA, thank you so much for helping me organize this. And thank you to everyone that commented and that interacted with us and sharing your questions. We really appreciate it. And if our panelists want to leave maybe like their website or any other information, Monica, if you want to leave the website to SANDSWA, you can also find more about us at NAHJ. We're on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we host panels like this one and events for all Hispanic journalists. So thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone got something useful out of this. So have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Awesome.